Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we have all NJ types with us. And so Chris, would you like to tell us a bit about you?
Yep. Hey everyone, I'm Chris. I run the YouTube channel AsuraPsych. I've been studying MBTI for almost 10 years now. I'm a certified practitioner. I work in typing and coaching people, and I'm a psychology graduate student.
His YouTube channel is great. If you want an insider's look into the INTJ mind and to hear his excellent NI thoughts and insights onto things, go check out AsuraPsych. And Erika?
Yeah, hi, I'm Erika. I'm INFJ. That's what happens with NI, I think. So there we go, NI. I am from Switzerland. I have been in the type community through Personality Hacker. I was certified a few years ago and now just recently got accredited. I'm a piano teacher and musician and singer-songwriter, and I think that's me.
Heck yes. And NiFe?
Hi, my name is NiFe. I'm an ENTJ. My wife and I live here in Denver, Colorado. I used to work for Personality Hacker, and so I'm very inspired by the MBTI community, and it's been fun to be part of it. And I work for Weight Watchers as a qualitative researcher.
Cool beans. And Denzel?
Hey, what's up, y'all? My name is Denzel. I'm an ENFJ. Right now, I'm working as a full-time life/personal development relationship coach. I also, I actually went through Personality Hackers profiler training as well. I think, yeah, just like everybody else here. And yeah, I think that's all. I also have a YouTube channel as well.
Yeah, a lot of people from this panel are from Personality Hacker, whether they worked for them or they're certified by them. And yeah, this is going to be a fun panel. And so Denzel, he has a YouTube channel too. So if you want to check out some ENFJ lovely content with a very cool, chill philosopher attitude while delivering it, then go check out Denzel's channel. I also have a collaborative channel with Denzel called the NiFe Show too. So feel free to check that out if you want to hear some NIFE insights. And so, hi everyone, my name is Joyce and I'm a certified MBTI practitioner and I facilitate the instrument in organizations. I also type and coach people. And so, NJs, what do you believe you all share with one another? What are some common features you would hypothesize you all share?
I would say strategy is one. I would say the thing that we strategize about might be different, whether it's TE or FE. But I would say like NJs tend to be strategic thinkers and tend to want to zoom out and see how all the pieces are interplaying with each other.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was going to say. I think that what we all definitely have in common is that, number one, we all look past the surface. We look at what's happening right now, yes, but then we use what's happening right now to focus on what the trajectory is going to be, like what's going to happen. How are the dominoes going to play out? So from my understanding, we understand the or the effects of how certain ripples can happen and what influences what in that case. And then from a lot of us, understanding how that works, then we're able to influence that. So because I know that if you put these dominoes in this row, or if these dominoes in this row happen like that, then this one's going to fall eventually. This one's going to fall, and we can also time that. Then sometimes we even get to the point of being able to set up the dominoes ourselves. So I think that's also where strategy can come into play, where you can either just observe how the dominoes are going to fall and predict that trajectory, or you can understand how the dominoes fall so well that you can set up those dominoes yourself to be able to allow them to fall to the trajectory of your will. So I think that's something that we all have in common, and then that bleeds into having an affinity for symbolism. It's like understanding, how, once again, what does this actually mean? Or what could it mean to other people? What could it symbolize to other people? Where did this root from? And then also an affinity to trying to understand the mind of how other people think based off of how we think. So always being detached from our own perspectives enough to be able to see how our perspective formed, and then seeing like the pattern of how other people's perspectives have formed in that same manner.
I call the NJ types conceptual finishers. So they take an idea and then they project that idea to the very end of the idea. So it's basically finishing the idea. Whereas I kind of see the NPs as conceptual starters. They like to kind of start ideas. The NJs kind of like to understand the trajectory of an idea across time. And so that's one of the traits I see. For some NJs, there's a long-term orientation. So having a far-looking relationship with the future. So being able to kind of see past the current moment to see what will be.
One thing that I think we all have in common is that we're always trying to draw out principles from situations, because basically concrete reality is overwhelming, probably to differing degrees, depending if NI is the dominant or auxiliary. But basically, how can I get an overview, or how can I generalize so that I can feel okay? And yeah, I think I'm answering this from a very NI dominant and SE inferior perspective. But one thing that the Melissa, our teacher, or the teacher of the advanced profiling class, says about NI is basically it's safety in concepts. And when she said that, I was like, oh wow, that explains my life. Like trying to feel safe and okay through a conceptual understanding of how reality works.
Trying to get to the main essence of reality, or the main idea behind it. It takes away the pressure from needing to act in the moment, because now you understand the ways in which the moment can play out so that you can predict, and then you won't be caught off guard or jarred by something unexpected. It gives you an ability to anticipate, and that anticipation creates a form of safety, almost knowing how it's going to play out in some way.
I think the word that comes to mind, if I were to just compare all the NJs and see how they relate, would be just general insight. I think that's what they kind of bring to the table, is like if you need someone to give you a perspective that maybe hasn't been thought of before, you usually want to go to an NJ. And this differs a little bit from the NPs when they're more idea focused, because the NPs will just kind of like shotgun out ideas and you can just kind of pick the one that best fits. But with the NJs, it's like they're really going to take their time to try and find the one that's going to fit the situation well. And I think that's what their unique gift is. And that's why you often find them in positions of like reform when it comes to society, you know, even with like the ENFJs and people like Martin Luther King Jr. It's like, well, why isn't the system working? Like what in the pattern is broken or missing, and how can we reform that?
Yeah. NI in the higher slots can come across as understanding the themes underlying reality. And so oftentimes people relate introverted intuition to archetypes, because like Erika said, they're trying to get a generalization of a situation. And through the generalization, it provides you like the underlying meaning you need to kind of understand it more thoroughly. And from that, you can create change in the forms that Chris mentioned with Martin Luther King Jr. and, you know, the NJs that kind of bring forward movement. One of the qualities to some NJs is wanting to bring forth the potential within things. If you have SE higher up sometimes too, you might want to also enact that change more. And so there will be this dynamic between wanting to understand an idea fully, and then with the SE, try to use the opportunities in the moment to seize that.
I think a really common feeling with a lot of NJs is the feeling of like, why can't people see that if they just made this one small change, it would have such a huge difference? And I think that really boils down to the fact that like NJs spend so much time observing, especially maybe even the INJs over the ENJs a little bit more, but they spend so much time observing that they come to more of these insightful conclusions, and sometimes at the expense of the kind of like tried and true ways that you might find with the higher SI types.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually, I feel like that's a really big thing. Like, especially when you look at fiction, how they talk about, you know, quantum physics or like time travel and everything. That's something that whenever I'm watching such movies or shows, it's like, okay, it's a common rule that you should not do. Like, if you go back in time, you like everything that you do influences the future in some way. And so you have to be like really careful with that, because even like some of the smallest things can change the trajectory. You know, you might delay somebody 2 seconds, and that could keep them from running into somebody who might run into somebody else who might influence this other thing that, you know, now some people never met, and then 10 years down the road, you know, just this whole thing, this whole mess. And I feel like when I watch certain shows, and like, it's not to call the NPs out, but like, you know, certain characters, like when they go back in time and stuff like that, like maybe like the Flash, Barry Allen, I believe personally that he's an INFP. And he'll go back in time and he's like, yeah, I'm going to save my mother, or I'm going to do this. It's like, I totally understand why you'd want to do that. That's rational in a way that's like, okay, no, I get it. But at the same time, it's like, do you know how much you're going to influence by this big drastic change? And I feel like, you know, a lot of times people are not like really understanding that, even with like Loki. I know that a lot of people type him as INFJ. Personally, I don't see it. I personally see him also as like an NP. And it's like, when he went back in time, like all the chaos that he was like just doing in the recent like Loki series and everything, I feel like that's something that NJs they pay super critical attention to, because once again, like, we're so attuned to like, oh, just like how AsuraPsych said, like, if you change this one thing, then you can influence so much with that one thing. That one ripple does actually have an effect on the ocean. And so you have to choose wisely when, not only what ripple that you decide to make, but when you decide to make it, which is where I think NI and SE marry each other. Like, I see NI and SE all about like timing. So it's like, I see, for me, I don't know how much you guys relate, especially like SE inferiors, but like for me, I always see it like myself as like waiting, and then it's like now, like I have to like seize the moment, like right at that moment. Whereas like when I've talked to NPs, then they're like, I don't relate to that. Like, there's opportunities all the time. So why do I have to wait for the precise moment? And it's like, that's a very interesting way of like viewing things. But yeah, like, so I think that over focus, or maybe not even an over focus, but just a hyper fixation on that moment, and that small thing that could change the trajectory once again, is a big thing for all NJs.
That is so true. And so a lot of NJs kind of begin with the end in mind almost, because that if you take Denzel's mentality, you can kind of see that he's seeing that one action can create certain types of ends almost. So it's the NISC playing with each other. And what happens there is, like, when you notice the effect of how time precisely affects the unfolding of things, you start to become very careful with things, because you don't want to like skew the meaning of things. And so you're like, every little SE move you can make can actually change the NI meaning of how you're going to live your life. So be careful about how you actually go about doing that. And with introverted intuition too, there's also this element of simulations, imagining how things will likely unfold, like most likely unfold, before it actually happens. So if you have to do something that requires quick reaction time, I know like with the INJs, like they definitely kind of tried to mentally forecast how someone would, like how they would have to react before reacting there. With the INJs, never truly being in the moment, because you're always trying to like anticipate so that you don't have to fully react in the moment. And so you'll see that element of mental preparation a little bit with the INJs. Do you have any thoughts, Ni?
It seems like NJs are natural editors. Like, we're good at, if something exists, we can also create things that don't exist, but it seems like we have this convergent energy where we're trying to distill and reduce and reduce and reduce things to its fundamental essence. Whereas it seems like NPs are more naturally more like writers. They can create a bunch of ideas and so forth and generate. They're a lot more generative, and I think we're a lot more good of refining and refining and refining and getting something to its core essence. And then once we have those fundamental principles, we can build anything from there. We can take that and use those almost as Lego pieces to build new ideas or arguments or perspectives. So that's something that comes up. It seems like there's a bit of a difference in their energy there as well.
Absolutely. With some NI users, you can identify them because they boil everything down to a certain thing. For instance, when I invite on me, he'll sometimes use the writer and the editor metaphor analogy. And I find that NJs come back to the same ideas because they want to thoroughly flesh it out to its end. And so Ni will bring up like this thing that the world all comes down to. Like everything in the world comes back to the writer or the editor. And then you'll explain this really wise saying around that. Denzel also comes back to the same concept often. He'll talk about the carrot and the stick. You know, everything comes back to a punishment or a reward. And it's true, the whole world kind of distills back to that. Denzel will also use a garden metaphor too, extremely often, because everything does relate back to gardens. And I find a lot of NJs using seed metaphors because seeds are very useful for NI because it's kind of NI likes to talk about the trajectory of things. So talking about things in terms of the analogy of a seed and how it grows into a sunflower or something like that actually explains the natural growth or how an idea can evolve over time. Okay, so type is not a behavior. So any type can use a garden or a seed metaphor. Never take one example from these videos and say that it applies universally. The main idea when these examples are presented is to take away the underlying principle from it. So there is something to be told from that, because I do find that NJs, there are a lot of them that return back to the same ideas that apply for all of the worlds. So anyone else want to share?
I think that what you were saying about running simulations is, again, like, you know, something that I very much relate to. Although I do think that it's most prominent with INJs for sure. Having SE as a inferior function and I as a dominant function. So that idea of anticipation and like, I know that for me, like if I have to envision it in my head first before before it happens externally. So so as an ENJ, it's like a lot of times also, like, even though everything is playing out already from my head and then it's manifesting, I have a easier time too with if something's happening that I didn't already like envision in my mind, then I can adapt to it. And then it's like, okay, let's quickly run a simulation now based off of like what's happening, which is where for me, it's like, okay, I have to be present enough to be able to once again catch the trajectory of things because they've all of a sudden shifted. And so that anticipation, I think that is once again like the simulation thing that you're talking about, is another thing that I think that NJs really deeply have in common too.
Makes sense. And so Denzel, like, I might be misquoting this, but I know that you know this quote, so correct me if I'm wrong. So, like, one of the ways to tell apart an INJ and an ENJ is the extent that they need to kind of simulate something in their head or plan for lack of a better word. The INJs maybe like need to plan to 90%, or they need to envision it for like 90% of it, and then they'll kind of like be okay with kind of acting, whereas like the ENJs are more likely to reach like is it like a 20% threshold, or am I getting?
So my guess is like, I think that INJs like at least at least want 90% before it's like, okay, I'll take action. They preferably want like 95 to 98 from what I think. Y'all can definitely correct me if I'm wrong. And then for, I think ENJs, they usually want like up to 70, maybe 80. And then the rest, like you said, like 20%. And I was like, okay, I think I can handle it from here. Like I can follow my intuition, which is actually really their SE from that point. Because I feel like that's where we ENJs, like we thrive a little bit more. Like it's like, okay, we don't have to chart the rest of it that much. But but yeah, I think once, like, just like you said previously, like, you know, it's not a foolproof thing. Like, I think that it depends on the health of the type. You know, I think that there are INJs who now become more comfortable with jumping in without having to get all the way up to 90% and higher, because they trust their auxiliary, just like ENJs who, you know, do not stop at 70, but they actually do run it up to maybe like a 90% before they like trust their SE a little bit more too.
Yeah.
But I definitely see with the one of the defining characteristics for me when I'm like trying to differentiate an ENJ and an INJ is that the INJs often have like an anxiety or fear about experiences that they are not 100% certain on. And I find that ENJs are so much better at just capitalizing on new experiences. It's like if you're playing, like imagine you have like a video game and you just have to pick a left and right choice over and over again. I find that like the INJ wants to start at the very beginning and try and get as many options as possible ahead and then start moving. Whereas with the ENJ, it's like, this one makes sense within this context, let's go. And then they get to the next fork in the road and it's like, this one makes sense within this context, let's go. So it's almost like the ENJs have like this situation by situation NI, whereas the INJs are so concerned about the final outcome that they don't even want to begin the experience until they feel like it's comfortable.
That's well put.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of a quote where it's like, successful people don't always make the right decisions, but they make their decisions right. Ever since I heard that, I was like, whoa, like that to me, like it makes sense, as in like if you can sit there and you can really think like, man, like which one do I pick? But if you kind of like adopt the mindset that whatever I pick, I'm going to capitalize on it, I'm going to make the best of it. This was low-key like fate, and that was the right answer, and so you just kind of like make yourself believe that, then yeah, I don't know, there's something about that mindset that like just gives you like more confidence, and it allows you to, once again, like you're not stressing, you're not as anxious. It makes you more decisive, and it makes you able to actually handle the decision that you've made. So yeah, I think that's also like another thing that could be thrown onto the table here.
I game regularly with an ENTJ friend, and I always see that difference when we play games, is that he'll make a decision that my NI will be like, you're going to lose this outcome, and he'll win it. Like against all odds, like 90 to 10, he'll win it. And he's just like, because I believed that I was going to win it. And I was just like, that's such a strange concept to me, because to me, it's like, why engage if the odds are not in your favor type of thinking.
Yeah, I saw that a lot on, I don't know how many of us watch anime, but Death Note, I think that Light Yagami is an ENTJ, even though most people assume that he's an INTJ. I actually think that L is an INTJ, even though most people assume that he's INTP. And I feel like the whole show is just a chess game between two NTJs. And if you watch it carefully, you can see like how L is trying to anticipate Light Yagami's like TE in that manner, as a TE dominant and everything. And yeah, so that same like, you know, thing, like even when they were playing tennis at one point, then Light Yagami was like, okay, so I like how, I forgot what the exact thing that he said, but he was like, okay, I like they were both very competitive, and they both said that, you know, we're so similar, we hate losing, but Light Yagami is like, you can't just be defensive, you also have to attack. And then he just made a move, and he beat L, and L was apparently like undefeated or something, but so was Light. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's like you just make a move, and you have to take that risk, and make that decision right. So yeah.
With some NJs, I also noticed that everything has to have a purpose or a point. Otherwise, why? If you go back to Denzel and how he was talking about how, you know, when you do one thing slightly different like that, then it'll change that, and then it'll change that. So like everything has a purpose.
Yeah, and every chess piece on the chessboard has a purpose. So like, even if one seems stationary, it has a purpose there for a reason. And eventually it's either already serving the purpose by being stationary, maybe it's a distraction, maybe it's a decoy, maybe nothing is just taking up space. You're using it in a certain way, or it's being ready to be used.
Yeah, everything is done intentionally, basically.
Mhm.
There is intention behind things. Like,
Mhm.
nothing is put there randomly.
Right, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Any other NJ qualities anyone wants to mention? How about Erika? I'm sorry if I'm like putting your SE on the spot too. You're like, oh,
That's a very interesting experience. So one thing I was thinking, I think Denzel, you said something in the beginning that went into that direction, like kind of about the perspective shifting aspect. I think what we all have in common is that we're not fully attached to our own perspective, and that we can basically observe our own thoughts and kind of, or like question, like, oh, interesting that I have this thought in my mind now. What's that all about? What does it mean? And that sometimes, I think at least for me with NI as a dominant, it can be, well, and probably there's also a bit of FE in that it can be a little more difficult to locate my own perspective in a situation because I'm looking at all the other people's perspective, and somehow actually I feel like my perspective ideally would be the one that brings all the perspectives together. Like, for example, our 5 perspectives, and like how they would all beautifully come together. And that, I feel like that would be the perspective that I would be able to get behind and be like, yes, that is my perspective. And as long as I haven't found that, sometimes it can be difficult. How do I see things? If that makes sense for other people.
Yeah. There's a non-attachment that comes with introverted intuition. A lot of people are kind of attached to their perspective. And so when you have NI and TI paired together, you can have this non-attachment to a perspective because you want to understand more of the framework of how people arrive at their thoughts rather than feel emotionally tied to any particular way of seeing things. And so oftentimes you can look at other people's perspective and you can say, oh, that's kind of true. That's kind of true. That's kind of true there. And so if you take together all of the kind of trueness, you can come to the most true that you can think of at that moment by incorporating how different people can view that situation into a thoroughly thought out concept of how they can work together, and like taking everyone's perception and finding that meta perception that is able to incorporate all of those points of view because they all make sense. It's almost like the ability to trace back other people's thought patterns. Denzel talks about it as metacognition. Nia and Denzel, did you guys want to talk?
Erika, to what you're saying, I feel like there's a distinction between the ENJ and the INJ, in that 100% agree that we have a certain degree of detachment from our perspective, and we can comfortably walk into somebody else's perspective. Sometimes I like to describe it as like opening the door and walking into their mind and just looking around, but not touching anything. Just saying, interesting. Just getting a sense of how they see the world. From my perspective, it seems like ENJs tend to have a point of view more strongly. And so at least from my perspective, I tend to have a pretty strong point of view on things, but I don't let that cloud me from being able to see other people's perspective or realize that my perspective might be insufficient because I don't have enough data or I'm not looking at it from a wide enough vantage point. So I feel like that's one distinction where I wouldn't be surprised if more ENJs tend to have a point of view, but can also, depending on their health, be able to step back and say, okay, well, that's one point of view, but let's see all the other perspectives as well.
Yeah, I think it depends on what we mean, because I could take it like both ways. So I would definitely have a point of view, for example, on something that's FE. Like, okay, I know that other people's perspective might be like, this is what's best for the group, but my ENFJ God complex is like, no, I really know what's best for the group. But just like what Nia is saying, is like, but I can hop into the perspectives enough to like see like, okay, yeah, I'm going to use this to inform what I already think. And I'm going to like try to cultivate what I already think best. However, if it comes to something that's like TI, then I really like, I had to work very hard on that because everything I just kind of was like, yeah, I don't know. Like, oh, that's what Antonia Dodge said. All right, then it must be true. Oh, that's what so-and-so said. Then I wouldn't really like think too much about it because I would think that, other people have already done enough of the thinking. And so it's like, okay, if they say that if you stick a fork into an electrical socket, you're going to get electrocuted, I don't really have to think too much about that or try to go experience it. I should just take your word for it. And then, of course, like over the past few years, I mean, that wasn't the exact example that happened with me, but like, there's been things that I'm like, wait, that's not true. And so now it's like, oh shoot, I have to actually, now I can't believe what people tell me, because apparently maybe it's not even that they're dumb, but it's just that they're biased in their own ways. They have their own limitations. So it's like, okay, I guess I have to start applying myself more to actually think critically about what I think aside from what is the general consensus, because this could be wrong, and that could be something as, big as the electrical socket thing, or theology, or even like with type, like, oh, you know what? Maybe, like I said, like, most people think L is INTP. It's like, but my own TI is like, after watching and everything's like, no, I think that he's an INTJ. I'm not adopting what other people think anymore. But I can still see their perspective as to why. So yeah, I think that Nee's right, where it's like, for the ENJs, because we lead with the dominant function, like Nee would probably be a lot more decisive than AsuraPsych, because his TE has ever since he was younger, he's always been naturally having to like make decisions, so it comes more easily to him. So he already has like a thought in mind. Just like for me, ever since I was younger, I was already always analyzing social, like interpersonal dynamics and everything. So it's like, oh, I can easily spot like, this is what the group needs, or this is what that person might need, maybe over what an INFJ might like more readily. But at the end of the day, like if it came down to like my TI stuff, then I definitely am more of the type of person to adopt, like I have more of an inclination, especially my younger self, to adopt what other people already said and think, and just be like, okay, does that make sense?
It does, yeah. Really cool point about the God complex, Denzel. So that brings to light that the ENJ types, so the ENTJ and the ENFJ, typically have a wider scope of concern for the group. And so they'll feel more responsible for either a larger majority of the group, or they'll feel more responsible over like a wider range of things, basically. Whereas with the INJs, so the INFJ and the INTJ, they're not going to have as wide as a whole general scope of responsibility over things outside of yourself. There's a saying that Erika knows about, and it's like, not my circus, not my monkeys.
Mm-hmm.
And so the INJs are less likely to get involved with things that are like not directly having to do with their scope. So
I really had to learn that. So yeah, that was not something that was natural to me. Like I actually had to learn that over the past few years. Like, you know what? That's not my child. You know what? This is not my responsibility. And like practicing that has helped me to be like, yeah, I don't really care. Like, and even, since we're, kind of like all from Personality Hacker, like I remember the last profiler training that I was at, some fight broke out, I think, or not like a fight, but like there was a schism of some sort. And I remember distinctly, like Joel Mark Witt, like he came to me like later. He was like, I noticed that when that was all going on, you were just kind of just hanging out and just watching. And it's interesting as an ENFJ male that you didn't feel the need to like just jump in. And I was like thinking to myself, yeah, I don't know. Like I felt like everybody else had it under control. This wasn't my responsibility. So whereas like, I think stereotypically like FESE, it's like, okay, let me jump in, like I can fix this. But now I've become more lenient with like, are there other competent people here? Then yeah, I don't have to stress myself. I'll hop in when I have to. But I think that takes longer for an ENJ, maybe ENFJ specifically, to learn.
Yeah, and because it takes the average ENFJ time to learn that skill, sometimes they're more prone to burnout too. So they'll bend over backwards for things and then burn.
Yeah. Whereas like I think INJ, they have like the opposite problem. that's like, oh no, maybe if I just hopped in, then this could have been solved. There's like, people could look at him like, you had the answer all along and you didn't speak up or you didn't do this. And it's again that like inferior SE. So it's like for them, it's like working on actually, being like, you know what, this probably really is my circus. Or even if it's not, like I should get involved, like it could help, So I feel like that's where we kind of try to like get into the middle. There's a balance, just like with most things in life.
True that. Any other thoughts on NJ similarities? Qualities that NI high-using types share?
We touched on this already, but something that I keep going back to over and over, like how important it is to have a clean map, or to have those, like, have a really clear picture in the mind of like all the different underlying principles or variables that affect the situation. And like for me, I'm sure you guys relate to this as well. I love mental models. I love finding a mental model that works. I mean, I'm just like, I feel like it's like discovering new technology, and I can do so much more with a lot less. And so being able to find those mental models or frameworks or principles makes such a big difference. And I feel like I don't have to exert as much energy. And I think sometimes the thing that can be a little frustrating in group situations is trying to distill something down to its essence and then getting all of the, well, but that doesn't apply in every situation, and trying to communicate that, of course, it doesn't apply in all situations, but it applies in more situations than it doesn't. And therefore, it's a good heuristic to use to deconstruct the situation until we find nuances. And so I feel like sometimes that can be frustrating, or in conversations of like, trying to distill something down to its essence and then watching the group being like, but here are all of the exceptions. And it's like, of course there are exceptions, but let's bring it back down to the fundamentals regardless.
That's how I feel about typology. It's like people are like, well, it doesn't apply in every single situation. It's like, but it's a general rule that really works for a lot of people. And I'm like, it's a good heuristic. There is an element to extroverted thinking that is heuristic oriented too, because it wants to find things that it can quickly act upon. There's a quality of being pragmatic that comes from finding a heuristic that can make you more pragmatic. So certain NJs can look for impact moments, a moment where it can change your paradigm so that you can operate life slightly differently that can ultimately drastically change the outcome of your life in a big picture way.
I definitely agree about heuristic thinking. And I think NTJs, out of all the types, tend to be the ones most likely to adopt heuristics. And it's like, when you look at NTJs, you always think of like, oh, it's like this hardworking overachiever. And it's, if you really look at NTJs, it's a lot of the time someone who's really lazy, who's taking the best shortcuts, because they're actively looking for the most, the shortcuts that are going to take them the farthest with the least amount of energy. And that's what I really see with the NTJs. Because if you look at like an ESTJ versus an ENTJ, even the ESTJ is the one who's in the office like 15 hours a day, like never goes home for work. And the ENTJ is like, oh, I'm going to do like a large amount of work, but at the same time, I've also found as many shortcuts as possible to make it viable without destroying my personal energy.
Plus one that.
Yeah. And so my next question for everyone is, how would you tell apart your type from these NJs? If someone was sorting between these four types, but didn't know which one they were, what are some ways you would be able to tell apart these types?
The first thing I would try to differentiate is, are you a rational type or an irrational? Are you judging or perceiving dominant type? Because, despite them both being Js, the INTJs and the INFJs tend to actually be a little bit less decided than the ENTJs and the ENFJs, because they lead with that perceiving function. So that's typically the first thing that I look for if I'm typing somebody, is like, hey, when you come across new information or situations or things that you strongly care about, how likely are you to have a strong opinion on these things? And if you tend to be more strongly opinionated more than not, you're probably going to be an EJ over an IJ. That doesn't mean that you're not going to find ENJs who aren't strongly opinionated, but if you definitely look at the overall curve, the INJs are usually going to have a lot less strongly of an opinion than the ENJs.
Yeah, going back to what we were talking about earlier about action, that it seems like INJs, or like for INTJ, for example, probably want to do more planning and want to get to the 90th percentile, perhaps even a little bit more, and then jump into action, where I feel like ENJs or ENTJs like, it was funny. The number that came to mind as we were talking about earlier was 75%. Like 75% is more than enough. And then that last 20%, you can just kind of iterate and calibrate as things are going along. And so what's the propensity for jumping into action? And because I think for ENTJs, like, action can be part of the learning process. It's like the purpose of taking action is to learn. Because a lot of my models are probably a bit inaccurate, and I'll be able to clarify them through action and getting real-time feedback. Whereas I feel like INJs, they're more likely to want to think things through more carefully, and then they'll feel more confident jumping into action.
Yeah, seconding what Nee said, I think that with ENJs, that action is really like necessary. And I feel like, I mean, I don't know how, especially like with uni, like if you've experienced the same thing, but I feel like when I read a lot about like ENJ, INJ differences, like what I'd see is that they attribute the SE tertiary kind of thing to like just impulsiveness, like very, very frequently. And I think, speaking for myself, I think that from the outside, it could look impulsive a lot of times, because maybe like, you know, if you're an INJ and you're thinking like, well, no, I would have waited a lot longer before I made that. So it's like, well, we're using the same functions, but again, like a tertiary versus a inferior, it's like I have more of an ability, and just like what Nee was saying, is like I'd learn better by throwing myself in sooner, because that's how I'm going to calibrate. That's how I'm going to correct. So even though it might look impulsive, it would probably be impulsive if an INJ jumped in as soon as I did. But for me, I already gauged how capable I am of taking this. So it's not impulsive. It's still methodical. It's still strategic. And so it's going to happen sooner. Like I remember me and my INFJ friend, like we did a video years back on like the difference between me and him as an INFJ. His name was David. And one of the examples that he brought up was like, yeah, just actually today, right before we started doing this video, we were living in the Bronx at the time, in New York City. And New York City, we're notorious for jaywalking. So he was like, yeah, there was like cars coming, and Denzel just ran. and and I like stayed behind. And the thing, like, and what we like noticed in that moment was like, I knew that like I could run and I could make it. Like that, like I know my ability to do that. But I would not advise him to do that. Because just like what he said in that video, he was like, well, if I would have ran, I would have got hit by a car. So it makes sense for him to look at me. He's like, well, Denzel, you're going to get hit by a car. It's like, no, if you ran, you'd get hit by a car, but not me. So I feel like that's like the difference. However, like, you know, maybe if I take more time, like hesitate as much, like TI being my inferior, if I try to use TI as much as like maybe an INFJ would, then that could be my crippling thing, because I'm not going to learn as much as until I actually hop into the action, because I will learn more from my SE, and the TI can then like follow. Whereas like with the INFJ, it is better for them to like stay a little bit more in that way. Now, of course, once again, we're trying to balance out a little bit more. So like the INFJ, the goal is to like learn to hop into action more sooner, and the ENFJ or ENJ is like the goal is for them to like learn to like be more patient. But I wouldn't say that the INJ is like incredibly crippled, and I wouldn't say the ENJ is like incredibly impulsive. So I feel like that's a big thing that could also be differentiated. Like, okay, who's, you know, more capable of hopping into action and like, you know, taking charge and like reading things like for what it is, versus the person who like needs that more time to recalibrate and readjust. And then also when you're differentiating like NFJs and TJs in general, I think all four of us, like kind of like what we already talked about, I see like so many similarities between NJs in general. Like I think that there's several situations where all four of them could be confused for each other. Like even as crazy as like I've seen like ENFJ characters that I've typed as ENFJ be typed as INTJ, online, and I'm like, wow, like, you know, people would never like think that, you know. And then even some INTJs have been like, you know, typed as like ENFJs. So it's like there's a lot of like overlap in that way. But I think that one of the biggest things is that, you know, again, what is TE versus like what is FE? From me as an FE Dom, like I'm seeing, again, like NI's already focused on the dominoes and the trajectory of things, but now you're fusing it with an understanding of how people interpersonally work. So it's not just the dominoes and the influence of, you know, ideas and concepts, but also how are people interacting? When is the right time to ask this question? When is the right time to give this information? When is the right time to like do this? Can this person handle that? Like what's going on in their relationship? Okay, like where did this start? You know, like you're looking at interpersonal dynamics, relationships, and all of that. And then you're utilizing that to the best of your ability. Like what's the weak spots of those dynamics and everything. Whereas like with TJs, with NTJs, they're looking at systems. They're looking at like, okay, what, well, I think that TJs, like they could probably speak on that difference there.
Yeah, I do find that the TJs definitely tend to be more concerned about like the practical outcome as opposed to like the people focused outcome. One thing I actually think that the NTJs don't get enough credit for is I think they're actually quite good at reading like people, because I actually think that comes from the NI, not the FE. I think it's the results and the actions that they take from the NI that are separate from the NFJs, where the NFJs tend to be more so concerned with like, okay, I've observed this pattern of behavior from this person and I understand how they're feeling now. What can I do to improve the situation? Whereas the NTJs more so, if there's not like a direct FI connection with this person, it's like, well, I'm not going to act on that. It's not my responsibility. Even, for example, if I walk into a restaurant and I see someone that I don't know, my mind will start spinning a story about like what, how did they come in to be in this position? Oh, they look upset. Like, why are they upset? But because I don't have the FE, it's like, well, it's not my response. I'm not going to go over there and like ask them how they feel or something or try and improve their mood unless it's someone that I know. But my mind is still very easily able to notice those incongruencies and how other people are, and how people are acting in general. I'm not sure if that applies for the NTJ or the ENTJ as well, but I know it certainly is for me.
I +1 that in terms of like that NI being able to step inside of their perspective, and the way that it's useful, I would say, for NTJs is if we can understand people's underlying motivations and what they care about, it makes it a lot easier to play the game, if we want to call it that. If it's a game of chess or game theory, it makes it a lot easier. So yeah, I totally can relate to that. Or if like, you know, I'm at the gas station and I see somebody drive up in a red Porsche, I'm like, I wonder what your relationship with your dad is. Why do you need a red Porsche? What is the red symbolizing? What do you want us to know about you? That you're successful, that you're accomplished? Why? And so like if I were to interact with that person in the workplace environment and I knew that they drove a red Porsche, I would be much more sensitive to how I present things, because I would assume they might have a sensitive ego, or they might have this need to want to project success and confidence. And if I challenge them in a way that's too direct, it undermines that, and that could cause all sorts of triggers and issues. So like those little type of things, red car equals sensitive ego, maybe issues with dad, which equals this and that. So I would echo that. I would +1 that, Chris.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of the NFJ comment on directly wanting to improve people's moods, that is true. I think like FE users do want to like directly kind of transform people's moods. I find that NFJs have an interesting way of going about it, though. It's like a little different from the SFJs. And so Erika has this interesting story about a thumb and how she helped someone with their thumb. And I think it's very demonstrative of how NFJs, or at least INFJs, approach helping people. If you want to share.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can share that. There was sometime last week a piano student of mine. He came to the lesson, a young boy, and asked him how he was. And he told me that he just, what do you call that? His thumb got into the car door. It got like, can someone help me out? What's the word?
Smushed.
Smushed. Okay, let's go with that. Okay, got smushed in the car door. And then I think, okay, well, the first thing I was like, okay, do you need to cool it under some water? Okay, he did that. And then I thought, okay, I'm gonna maybe he doesn't want to jump right into the pieces that we're working on. Okay, so let's improvise a little bit. And then he started crying while we were playing. And he actually was I was surprised by that. He said, well, actually, it's also emotional, what is happening. It's not just the pain in the thumb. It's a comment that his father made afterwards. The father said something like, well, this was a painful lesson right now. And I think he didn't quite understand what the father had wanted to communicate by that. And he didn't feel, I guess, validated. And so so for me, it was very clear, okay, right now I have to help him make meaning of this situation. And I have to let's find out, okay, what might your father have meant by this? Okay, and what can we learn from this situation? And then the interesting thing was when I went home and told my ISFP partner about the situation, he was like, well, but what about the pain in his thumb? Didn't you focus on the pain in the thumb? And I was like, at some point I kind of forgot about the pain in the thumb specifically, because I was very much about how can we understand these kinds of situations that sometimes happen in life, and how can we process them? For me, it was very much about the emotion and how to what lessons can we draw when these things happen.
It's almost like, how can you think better about this? Or it's like, what paradigm shifts do you need to take away from the situation? And then the actual obvious situation gets pushed aside while you try to look for the deeper meaning behind the situation.
I feel like that was a great illustration of what we were talking about earlier about the principles of you're gonna smush your thumb many, many times in your life, metaphorically speaking. It might look different in what's smushed, but it's still the same fundamental problem. And so if you can come up with a good approach, a healthy relationship to what happens when that issue arises, you can apply that in every other situation moving forward, and you're killing hundreds of birds with one stone.
Yeah, I was actually raised by both an INTJ and an ISTJ, which is kind of a weird relationship to be raised by. And I definitely related with the parent almost in the story you just told, where they were trying to give this lesson. Because I feel like anytime I made a mistake growing up, it was well, now you won't make that mistake again. And it's the INTJs tend to be let them sink just a little. Just throw them in the water and let them sink, and either they're going to swim or you can pull them out right before they're going to drown. But that's how I was raised personally, and I feel like that's how I try. If you can find the right level of that, where it's not you're making them suffer intentionally, that can actually, I think, be really beneficial to people, because it shows them that they can accomplish so much if they're willing to make mistakes, if they're willing to take a few risks every now and then. So I think that's actually. But it does, you need the NFJ there to be hey, they're not trying to hurt you. They're trying to help you. They just have their weird way of going about it.
There's this emphasis on changing your mindset to change your life that NI has. Well,
question. This is in particular for the NFJs, around emotions. And Chris, you probably have a point of view on this, so please chime in as well. It seems like when it comes to emotions, I feel like there are almost two buckets that come to mind. If I'm interacting with somebody and I see that they're upset in the moment, they're angry about something in the moment, I almost have this model, which might not be accurate, that there's the immediate emotion they're feeling right now, the immediate mood. Earlier, we were talking about moods. So I'm in this moment, you're feeling angry. But then I also feel like there's the more general mood in terms of where they are, what state they're in, what their kind of is their default emotion or perspective. And sometimes I struggle to understand how their immediate emotion of that anger affects their overall mood or temperament. Because I feel how earlier we were talking about the NFJ strategies to lift people's moods. From the NTJ strategy, or from the NTJ perspective, I can look at it and think that seems really challenging, because people's moods just go up and down all the time. And I feel like it's difficult to try to manage all those moods, and one thing can cause somebody to go from being in a good mood to a bad mood. But I feel like I get the sense that there might be that immediate emotion that they're feeling, but that is different than their overall temperament or like mood, and that their immediate mood might influence their, I don't quite have the language to describe this. So as you can see, I'm like grasping for words, but it seems like the two interplay with each other. And sometimes I struggle to understand to what degree does somebody's current mood influence their overall position on a plan, for example. If we've got if we're using NJ long-term domino metaphor, and we're going in a certain direction, but there are a couple of people that are kind of upset in the moment, how much is their frustration in the moment going to influence their overall relationship with that plan? And sometimes it can be a little harder to discern that, or to know how much time to invest in lifting their mood or trying to address the situation in the moment, and how much of that is just, with time passing, they'll get over it, they'll forget it, and it won't even be a thing anymore.
Yeah. Do you know how some people have a hard time focusing on having fun when they know that there's something that they should have done, but like it's a project that now was supposed to be finished, but isn't finished. And now they're trying to have fun hiking while they're like, oh, I'm going to get so much. This is a bad situation, man. Like, you can apply that same principle to a person's mood. What if a person can't be their top best self if they have an emotional barrier keeping them in the way? And sometimes that could be that dumpster fire at the back of their mind, preventing them from being at their fullest potential or the most best version of themselves. So it's almost like through changing that emotional human block, you are able to actually get them to be less in that space where their mind's divided, or they're having that type of cognitive dissonance. When you can resolve that cognitive dissonance within themselves, and they can go forward.
That was very helpful. I want to hear other perspectives and then try to synthesize what I'm hearing.
What struck me in what you were saying is it sounded to me almost, like kind of that overall mood that you're describing, it's kind of like there are certain moods that maybe are more familiar to someone or more magnetic. Is that a word? Like kind of, or like it's, or maybe I think there's also this metaphor of the thermostat is kind of set to that mood, and like how far away is the current mood from the thermostat? Like how big is the difference? And that may also be part of like how much you may have, like how impacted they are by the current mood, and how much needs to happen before they can get back into like a workflow, maybe, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that.
For me, that thermostat kind of is something that I feel like I notice with people that I'm really close to, but it doesn't apply to the overall sphere. Or maybe even if I do notice it, it's like I don't care. But I'm really sensitive to like friends who have something wrong. Like even if the slightest thing is off, I'm like, hey, what's up? Like, and also it's almost like I don't want other people to know that I care in such a way. That sounds kind of weird. Like if I see a friend who's having a bad day on Discord, I'll message them privately, not on the Discord or not on the server. I'll message them privately, and it's because I want to have that conversation with them, and I don't want it to be something that's represented, to everyone else. It's just between me and that person, one-on-one.
I really like that thermostat idea. I don't know if it's because I'm an Enneagram 9, but I usually, when I'm asked the question like, oh, what's your general emotion or mood, which my ISFP wife Lovely told me a couple of days ago, that contentment is not a mood, but I'm going to make it one anyway. I feel like that's my general mood, like content. Like, so when I'm at my best, I'm not super elated, super excited, all of that. I'm also obviously not angry or sad down in the dumps, but I'm always finding myself, like as soon as I move, I'm always trying, even if I'm really happy, I'm trying to get back to content. Like I just want to be cool and like I'm good, you know what I mean? And I feel like that's where I try to like gauge what everybody's mood is, like in that way. So if somebody's like general mood, like there are just people who their general mood is just, like annoyance or irritability. and that's just where it's at. And for a lot of them it's healthy, but then I've also noticed for some of them, like, no, that's the best that you can get from them, and anything more would be like trying to get me to be like overly excited in some way. And so like that's all right. You just have to adapt to that. So I tweeted that in my experience, FE understands that when people are not in a good mood, they most likely won't interact well. And if they don't interact well, the dynamic is subpar. And an FE does not want to engage in a subpar dynamic. So either they will see if there's a need to meet, or they'll come back later. I don't know how much like Erika like relates to that, but like I know that that's the case for me and like other FE users that I've seen. Like I don't see FE always as like we're trying to uplift the mood in that way. Actually, I see this with SFJs, ESFJs. Like, hey guys, come on! Like, you know, I don't see me and like other NFJs in that way, and I think there's a time for that. So it's not even like to call out the SFJs. Like when I see like them do that, I'm like, wow, I actually really respect that that's what they're doing, because this is a context where like we need that. But I don't think that that's an NFJ thing usually. I think that we are often more of the types it's like, okay, I see that you're not at where I've seen as a pattern for you at your general state of that mood. I'm just trying to get you back there so that, you know, our dynamics can be pleasant. But if I see that there's nothing that I can do and you have to go through the motions for that, or if there's like no way that I can influence that or help, that's totally cool. I'll let you go through that and I'll just come back later. And the reason why I might come back later is because sometimes, like for me personally, like I know that with my wife, she's an ISFP and she's a 4. I feel her emotions. And for me, it's like very like, what is this? Are you okay? And she's like, yeah, I'm fine. And I'm like thinking in my head, no, you're not. I literally feel what you're doing with your emotions right now. But for her, she's fine. She's like, no, I does this. Like to you probably couldn't take it, but to me, like this is just me. It was like, okay, well, I don't want to influence what you're doing because I realize that that's a part of your process. So I'm gonna let you do that, but I can't sit here and feel that because I'm just not built like that. So I have to excuse myself and then come back later because I can't easily detach from that. So I think that's something. And then just lastly, like to throw out there into the mix, like I have a little like anecdote, and I'll try to like keep it short, but I would really love, you know, y'all's opinions on this, especially like the NTJs. Like I think that as I think as an FE Dom, although I think that possibly like all of us could do this, we tend to really like hold space too for other people's like emotional experience, in the sense that okay, this person's having a bad day, I'm not going to retaliate. So the reason why I say this is like one example could be that on Halloween, me and my INTJ friend, we were going to Six Flags, and they were in charge of like, you know, buying the tickets and all of that. We had already like pretty much used up the whole day doing like other things, and so we were already getting to Six Flags like pretty late, long line and everything. And I was kind of like irritated because it's like we lost a lot of time. I wanted to do this like 30-second TikTok video because I was dressed up as like Mike Calvin Cambridge or whatever. So that was like the one thing that I really wanted to do for Halloween, and I wanted to do it before the sun went down. So we finally get through the long line and everything, and we're ready to like, you know, show our tickets. And then the INTJ is like, oh, I never screenshot them. And on top of that, we don't have service over here. So I'm like, and I'm like annoyed, you know, I don't want to like stereotype. I'm like, really? You didn't, because the INTJ is always poking at me at times like, oh, aren't you supposed to be an NI auxiliary? Aren't you supposed to think ahead or whatever? So I'm thinking in that moment, like, aren't you supposed to think ahead, Miss NITE? But, you know, I left it to myself, like, you know what? It's whatever. There's nothing we can do about this now. Let's go to the will call, whatever. And I could tell that the INTJ was already having a bad day because of that. Like, I was embarrassed by that. So I did not even say the, you know, snarky comment. but that line was long. Like the will call line was long. So I was like, okay, so that took up a whole other hour to be able to get those tickets and everything. And once we got inside, then there was another issue that happened where pretty much, like, long story short, I was supposed to take a picture of the daughter somewhere, and the daughter had to go pee. And then there was just the whole thing, and the INTJ was like at the front of the line. And she calls me, and she's like yelling at me. She's like, "Where are you at?" Like, and pretty much like there was just whole like up spiral, and all I could think in my head was, when you messed up, I did not give you any trouble, but I messed up, and this isn't even really my fault. Like, your daughter had to use the bathroom and everything. I just did what was best, and like, you're frustrated because you were at the front of the line and all of this. But once again, I immediately told myself, rather than retaliating and everything, I just immediately, I took all of the berating words, and I was just thinking to myself, she's having a bad day. she's already embarrassed from this, and must have been frustrating to be in the front of the line in this way. And who knows, FI tertiary just exploding, doesn't have control of their emotions in that way. I should be mature and just keep myself silent in that way. I don't know how much that might have to do with FE in general, or like, but like, I feel like that's also, like, once again, like, I know that that's not her baseline mood. And so therefore, rather than trying to influence it, in fact, after that incident, I left her alone for the rest of like the Six Flags trip. Like, I said, hey, I'm going to go over there and we can meet up in about 2 hours at the front. And she's like, all right, cool. And so, yeah, she did whatever she was doing, and then I did whatever I was doing, and we didn't hang out for like that whole rest of the evening in that way. And I feel like that's like, so I think that plays into a part of like, okay, once again, I know that you're not at your baseline or whatever, and I know I can't influence you to become at that baseline. So I'm going to let you do whatever you're doing. I'm going to do whatever I'm doing, because yeah, people's emotions, like, they fluctuate all the time, and you can't handle that. But you also have to have this understanding that, like, because people's emotions like fluctuate and it makes them act outside of who they really are, then you have to hold space for that, and you can't retaliate against who they're not. That was a lot. I'm sorry, but does that make sense?
Yeah, there was like
I felt
15
like
different points to cover there, but yeah.
Yeah, I felt like I had to give the context of the situation to like really, because I don't know, I feel like there's a lot to go off of over there. But
no, yeah, I did, before I forget it, just because it's something that stood out to me right at the beginning of that conversation you started there. When you were talking about contentedness as a feeling, that's something that really stood out to me. I'm actually married to an ENFJ. My wife's an ENFJ. And when we first got together, whenever I would ask her how she was doing, she would always say, I'm content, just like you did with your partner. And it was so confusing to me. I was like, I don't like, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? And it took me forever to realize that, like, she was searching for baseline. Like, she wants to come back to the emotional baseline instead of trying to like seek the highs and the lows. So that was really confusing to me. And maybe your partner's also an ISFP, so a Gamma Quadra. So it's probably just like there's just this mismatch of functions going on there.
Yeah, she literally tells me, like, there's no way that you can always be happy, Denzel. That doesn't make sense. And I'm like, why doesn't that make sense? But yeah, that's funny though. That's cool.
And the other thing I wanted to say was I do kind of resonate with the INTJ in your story a little bit, in that I am super guilty of I told you so's. And it's just so present to me when someone makes a mistake. And it's like, that's something I had to like learn to stop doing as I got older. And now I don't say it, but I certainly am thinking it as hard as I can. It's just like, I told you 50 times that this was going to be a problem and you were going to make a mistake, and it's going to be a problem here. And now it happened. And it's hard for me to want to console someone when they didn't listen the whole time. It's for an example, my wife, the little drain thing in the sink stopped working recently. So without telling me or asking me to fix it, she just pulled it out and threw it away. So now we just have this big hole in our sink. And for 2 months, it's been there. And I was like, hey, eventually you're going to drop a ring or something down there. And she's like, no, I'm not. It's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. And the other day, she drops her ring down the sink, and she comes crying to me. And I'm like, for the past 2 months, I've been telling you, like, you should have just gone and got the replacement. You threw it away. It's your responsibility. But I die a little inside every time I have to do that.
Do you feel anything if other people tell you I told you so? Or is it kind of like yeah, I do it to other people, so therefore I deserve it, kind of thing.
If I make a mistake, I'm the one telling myself I told you, like I'm beating up myself over it.
Gotcha.
So if someone else is beating me up over a mistake I made, it's like already something I'm usually willing to take
But if somebody
responsibility
else is
for.
beating themselves up, you feel the need to double down on that? Or?
No, it's not that I want them to feel bad. It's that I'm not going to tolerate them like being super upset about it if it's something that I've already warned them repeatedly about. Like if it was something that I just made an offhand comment about one time, I'm not going to say so. But if it's like, hey, for the past 2 months I've been telling you, like, you need to do this and you're not going to do it, then you don't deserve my sympathy when it's time for you, when you made that mistake.
That makes total sense. Yeah, because I really avoid the "I told you so's" because I feel like people are always beating themselves up for it. So I'm like, no, I don't have to say anything. But yeah, when I look at INTJs, especially, I do see that pattern of like just asserting that, like, I told you so, or like ridiculous, like,
Right.
and stuff like that. And it's like,
and it's not like we're trying to make fun of them or anything. It's not like I'm like actively going to pressure them about it, but it's like, you want the lesson to be learned in some sense. You want there to be some sort of repercussion from it.
Got it.
I guess I'm going to jump in here and say, like, for me, I relate to Denzel saying, like, avoiding the "I told you so," because for me, I guess the difference that I'm seeing right now is that, as you, Chris, are saying, like, I want the lesson to be learned. I'm thinking I want the emotion to be processed that the person is experiencing. So I'm like, okay, what do they need right now? Okay, they're already being hard on themselves. They need someone maybe to be present with them and just maybe distract them, maybe whatever they need. So that's kind of where I go or jump to.
It goes back to what Chris was saying, how the NTJs are more practical focused. So they're like, okay, lesson learned. Put the plug in the sink, and then we won't do that. And then the NFJ is more of the people oriented, and they're like, let's process those feelings and bringing people through that. It's kind of an NF thing, or maybe an NFJ thing, or an NJ thing. But now I'm just adding too many variables. When someone brings you an emotional issue, is to kind of ask, why are you feeling that way? And why do you want to feel that way that you want to feel after that? Like, it's almost like trying to figure out, why are you doing it? And then is there a better why for you? So it's trying to help you find the better why.
What I thought was really interesting about the story I told my wife as well is she was actually less sad that she dropped the ring down the sink and more sad that she did the mistake that I told her she was going to make. And that's why she was really upset about it, because she was like, oh, man, like, now he's going to tell me I made the mistake.
Highly relatable.
The answers to the question were very helpful. What I was hearing was, Joyce, I think earlier you were talking about emotional barriers. Like, if somebody is experiencing a negative emotion, they're just not going to, they're going to be more tunnel focused. They're going to have tunnel vision. What's in front of them is the only thing that matters. It's almost like, I don't mean this in a belittling way, but like, we just got a puppy not long ago, a golden doodle. And like, if he's hungry, that's the only thing he's thinking about is food. Or like a baby, if they're like, like somebody took their toy, that's the only thing they're thinking about. And unless that's resolved, they're not going to zoom out naturally and think about the bigger picture and how this is like they smashed their thumb and might be a painful experience. But if they zoom out, this is a lesson to be learned. So I feel like that was really helpful just to get that reminder, because I don't think I'm always piecing together that. And then I really love the thermostat metaphor of like asking the question, what is somebody's baseline emotion? Because if somebody is cranky, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That might be their default emotion. They might just naturally be cranky. Maybe they're a little less cranky than they normally are. So it's kind of like they're a little less cranky than they normally are relative to this person who's never cranky, but they're cranky. So there's this like nuance there, like what is somebody's baseline emotion, default emotion. And that was also helpful to hear. Like, I think I had the impression that FE was concerned, or NFJs were concerned about like lifting up everybody's emotions. And it sounds like there's some nuance there where it's not necessarily that you guys are always trying to lift somebody's emotions. Sometimes if somebody's in an emotional state where their thermostat's a little lower than the default, you just step back and give them the space to work through the emotion. And you circle back to them later on. because trying to get involved might actually make the emotion even worse in some situations. So that was helpful to hear. Like once their thermostat is back to normal or slightly above normal, that's when we get the best out of people. And that's the relationship between the emotions and action.
I definitely think that Denzel especially was onto something when he was talking about the NJ versus SJ difference. That the NJs, I think, are more so concerned with, like, in the long run, what is the best for the person, whereas the SJ is like, right now, what is the best for the person? How can I make this a better situation in the moment? And sometimes, as an NJ, you have to say, well, they have to struggle a little bit now if they want the best outcome in the long run. And I think NFJs are the ones who are very well aware of that line and like where to go on it. And then the NTJs on average tend to be a little bit more harsh with and again, it varies from NTJ to NTJ, because even if I talk about myself with the I told you so, I'm actually not really that harsh of a person. Like I haven't met anyone call me mean or anything, but I do tend to be upfront with mistakes if people make them, and it's because I want them to be aware of those. As I would want the same in return. I think that's actually something that is important. I want someone to point out if I make mistakes, because it helps me grow.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when you're really aware of the long run, these little things that happen to you, like a stubbed thumb, are inevitable. You're going to run into these types of situations. So saving you from every little situation like that is not going to be like, it's not going to help that person truly grow, because it's like, well, you're going to stub your thumb even when I'm not there. So I have to help you, or I want to help you learn how to think about this better by changing how that person, what NiFe said, generally approaches that situation. By changing their mindset, it gives you a more long run type of view on things. I guess the NJs are more focused on the overall long run health or the well-being across time. They're less focused on remediating the right now.
And it sounds like this is where sustainability comes into play. Of like it's unsustainable to try to fix the situation every single time for them, and in the short term, like it can create dependencies and they don't learn the lesson. Chris, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't even know.
I'm actually just going to build right off of what you said there. In my opinion, it's like when you look at the SI way, it's like, imagine you're sick and you need a nurse, so you go to the hospital. You don't need the nurse when you leave the hospital. Like if you just had a nurse who lived in your house and took care of all of your needs every day, you wouldn't become a person. You wouldn't be able to develop the simple habits that a human needs. So it's nice to have the SI moment to moment things when you need them. Like, you're at a social engagement, you want somebody to uplift the mood. You're in a hospital, for example, you need a nurse, someone to take care of you. But the rest of the moments, occasionally you're going to need the NJ push of like, hey, you have to develop your own skill set so you can interact with the world independently without someone, constantly giving you uplifting support.
Yeah, though when it comes to kind of how to respond to people's emotional expressions, I feel like I learned an important lesson in my late teens, and it was probably an FI lesson, though obviously I didn't know that it was that, which was that I had this habit of when someone would tell me about a situation that upset them, maybe a boss had said something or a friend, then I shifted into this third person's perspective and said like, well, probably, or they might have meant this and this. So there's actually there's no need for you to feel upset. And I had a friend who then at some point kind of forcefully said like, sometimes I just want to vent. Okay. I don't want to hear what the other person's perspective might have been. I just want to hear like, yes, that totally sucks. And that person said something really stupid. And I feel like that was probably a moment of refinement for my FE, because I had my need was for the person's emotion to be resolved. And that was a moment of okay, in order for me to actually get to that outcome, sometimes I just need to be like a venting partner, and that's completely okay.
And something that it's kind of like on a similar spectrum there, being married to an ENFJ, is that like, if I'm upset, I don't want a venting partner, but I also don't want to talk to somebody in general about it. Like for me, I just need to like process on my own. And I think, Denzel, you even mentioned your ISFP partner was kind of like that in some way. where it's like, for me as FI, it's just like, I just want to go away and deal with it. And she'll constantly be like, hey, are you okay? Are you feeling okay? And it's like, yeah, I'll be fine if I have an hour or two to think about it, or, like some time to process it. But I have to have the time on my own to deal with an emotion as opposed to talking about it. And I feel like for me, almost talking about it just makes me more riled up and makes it worse personally, unless it's in a more neutral state after I've thought about it.
Yeah, the INTJs that I know are also the same way. The INTJ friend that I mentioned, she doesn't even like when people ask her, are you okay? Like, she really doesn't like that. Like, and maybe it's also because she's an Enneagram 5, but like, she just really like sticks to herself, and like she doesn't want her emotions to be a burden at all to other people, but also like, I guess like she's private about them and she just wants to deal with them like on her own. So it's kind of like one of those things that even I've learned, like, okay, I'm sensing that you're not all right, but let me just play oblivious, because not because I'm being rude and like, but if anything, I'm trying to honor your wishes and allow those to be private. Whereas like, for me, I do feel like I'm kind of like both. Like, there are times where like I don't want to share how I feel with just anyone, and it always depends on like context. Like sometimes like, we'll hop on a call, like me and Joyce, and then Joyce, she's a lovely friend of mine, but like she'll ask me like, Denzel, like, are you okay? And I don't lie. That's one thing I try not to do. I try not to like tell people that I'm okay when I'm not okay, but I will definitely tell you like, no, I don't really want to talk about it. Like, because yeah, there's just times where like either it's just gonna get the other person upset and then we're both just kind of like gloomy, and then now I feel even worse because it's like, great, I just threw this on you, or like you said, like, it's just gonna get me like more riled up, and I'm just trying to get back to contentment. So it's like, I don't need to think about this anymore, and talking about this won't help me get back to contentment. But there are certain people at certain times that I could go to about such things, and then they actually help me get back to contentment. And so then that's when I would want to talk to them about that. So I'm asking now, like, for the NTJs, is there ever a situation, well, not ever, but like, are there situations frequently where it's like, you know what, yeah, sometimes I really do need to talk it out? Or is it like, no, I always have to keep it to myself?
For me personally, it's usually I don't want to talk it out, but also I tend to think the only things that genuinely make me upset, aside from like, like universal things like a family member passing away or something, is something that is a problem that I will feel like needs to be solved. And I feel like it's almost like, for me to get back to any form of contentment, I have to solve the problem. I have to fix the thing that made me feel bad. And I tend to become like hyper focused on working on that one thing until it's done. And it's even like earlier we mentioned, like, we can't relax sometimes until you've accomplished the thing that you need to do. Like sometimes I'll wake up in the morning, I'll sit down and be like, I'm going to play games for an hour. And then I'll go, well, I haven't studied my lesson for today. And I can't enjoy this game until I've studied my lesson for the day. It's the same thing about same way about how I personally feel with emotions. It's like, well, I can't feel good about anything until I've at least come to some sort of conclusion about the thing that caused me to be upset in the first place. So I have to kind of revisit it and think about it for a while.
Yeah, that sounds relatable in the sense that I feel unresolved until I feel like there's a conclusion. I have a conclusion and like a point of view on this situation or problem that happened. So I do enjoy talking to people, but select people to be able to. One of the things that can help it is getting a perspective reframe, talking to somebody who can help me see, basically kind of like what you were saying, Erika, like I stubbed my thumb and I need somebody that can like walk me through it and help me to realize that this is actually a lesson and that I'll be able to apply this in the future. That helps a lot, to be able to be like, oh yeah, you're right. Like, it sucked, or it was frustrating, it was embarrassing, it was confusing, but in the grand scheme of things, who's going to remember this in 3 months? What can I learn from this? So I find that kind of conversation to be very helpful, more so than just like, I'm sorry you feel bad. Let's talk through your emotions. And then the second element that's helpful is somebody helping me think through what I can do differently. And, if there's still something in the situation or conflict that is unresolved, what can I do to resolve it? And I don't necessarily have to jump into action right then and there. But if in my mind, I'm like, okay, this approach seems to resolve the issue. Okay, great. I feel much better about it now. And I can continue on and I'll address that issue and take action when it's appropriate.
So surprisingly enough, this is going to sound weird, but one of the most helpful types for me if I'm struggling or feeling down about something is an ESTJ. And it's because I want someone to like give me the answer almost, or tell me the hard truth. And it's like, if I can hear the hard truth and come to some form of conclusion, then I can feel better about it. And it's going to sting, and it's going to hurt at first, but I really like having an ESTJ to ping off of when I'm in a bad mood, because it's like, you're not talking about the emotion, you're talking about the problem. And once the problem's solved, then you can get to the emotion. Then you can, start to deal with that.
Solid. Nee, you mentioned how like you kind of like it when people zoom out when addressing the issue. That brings me to the thought that like as an NI user, it can be hard to sometimes communicate in your natural form. So you have like this zoomed out way of seeing a situation, but then like oftentimes like when I try to instigate those type of conversations with people, they miss me. So it's almost like I throw them a ball and they don't catch it. And it's like, great, I was trying to tell you this idea so that you could build, or you could add to it, or you could understand it in some way to give me something to think about too. But oftentimes it's like throwing a ball out and then it just gets absorbed by this black hole. And it's like, great, I got nothing back from this. Great. So oftentimes there can be a one-sidedness, that natural form of communicating, wanting to get at the deeper why, and then sending a ball out and then it not being thrown back to you is like a life theme for
I think that the NFJs probably will struggle with that a little bit more, just because not only do they have the NI, but they generally want to be able to communicate that with other people. Whereas for me, it's always just felt like, especially growing up, it was like, I'm different, and I may not see things in the same way as many of my peers, but whatever. I don't feel lonely about it or anything, or it's not like if I try to talk about a topic and someone doesn't pick it up, I'm just like, okay, well, on to the next person. And I feel like maybe the NFJs who want that FE connection might feel more about that. I'm not sure if that's how you feel, but
that's interesting. I wonder if one of the other ways to tell apart these types is through Kiersey too. He mentions how the NFs want soulmates and the NTs want mind mates, and I wonder how true that is.
Yeah, that resonates with me. Yeah, that resonates, because one of the ways that I was thinking actually that could distinguish an ENFJ from the rest of the NJs is that classic FE. I like those like thoughts of like, oh, when you put these certain types in a room, who's going to be doing what, and this, that. And I do see like the ENFJ as the one who usually like facilitates conversations and discussions. Like, so just to like go meta, my thought process here is like, I don't have a problem like remaining silent, but then at the same time, I'm like, well, if we're all here to connect and we're all here to share information, then if we need to nudge some of the others a little bit more, like take lead in that, Denzel, and then also try to like help get the ball rolling some more. And I think that that's usually what the ENFJ's role is. I mean, like, let's get the ball rolling. And then once the ball is rolling, step back, let people talk and everything. Once you see it start slowing down, find something else to throw into the mix, because you want to hear the people's, thoughts and opinions and stuff like that. And you want to maximize in that moment of like, I like right now while we're together, I want to maximize and get the best of this. I want to be able to understand everyone here. And I want to be able to like, like it's nice. It's possible, I should say, to sit in silence. It's possible. And it's nice, sure. But I would always choose actual connection and building depth of like, getting to know someone. Because I feel like, you could sit in silence with anyone, but getting to actually know somebody, what they think, what they feel, all of that, that's not something that you can always do. That's not somebody that's easily replaceable, somebody that you've exchanged information, intimate information about yourself with. And so that Kiersey thing about like, having like a soulmate in that way, I definitely relate to that in the sense that like, if I really enjoy a person or like a person, then I will be the type to take lead in trying to get us both to like trudge up things that'll I'm always aiming to foster intimacy. And yeah, I think that, you know, that's how you'd probably be able to tell the ENFJ from the rest of the NJs. Like they might be the ones to like lead the conversation.
Interesting. Very, very cool. And so thank you everyone for coming out and discussing the NJ types with me today. It's really nice to see how long range and far spanning and zoomed out you all think, and that you all are kind of considering the long range impacts of the things that you do. I appreciate the ripple effects and the domino effects that you all consider. With the NFJs, it's more of these thermometer ripple effects and domino effects, whereas for the NTJs, it's more actual practical thing domino effects in the systems. So it's pretty interesting to see that. It's also really nice to hear about how y'all experience your type. You know, Erika, how you help your piano students and their stub thumbs by teaching them the lessons from that thumb incident. You're helping console their soul. So good on ya, Erika. And Denzel, thank you for your insightful, chill ENFJ commentary, and for recording the NiFe Show with me and trying to work your ENFJ magic by trying to get me to share more about myself to people. It's like all of his strategic scheme to get me to talk more about myself. So yeah, thanks, Denzel, for that push there. And NiFe, thanks for coming out and discussing your logical heuristics on how to work smarter. It's nice how you take like these general principles and you try to figure out a way to make your life more efficient and more pragmatic through these principles you see that are far-reaching, and these generalizations you find useful for navigating life. They're excellent. Yeah, so the EJs are really good at generating an achievable and expedient action, or just taking action. So that's pretty cool to see. And Chris, thanks for coming out and withstanding my compliments at the end. Yay, you're an outstanding citizen.
Thank you.
For
Joy as always.
My Effie. Yay. Much appreciated, AsuraPsych, and thank you for letting us into your INTJ layer of your mind. It's nice.
My evil mastermind layer. All INTJs have.
Yep. Yeah, and so thank you everyone for coming out. Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you all in the next episode. Bye.
I'm a lazy fuck, but I'm dutiful. Nothing but the bare and the beautiful. I don't seem to work without routine to keep me from the unforeseen. The light throws shadows on my path. Feel like crying and instead I laugh. The dust lies heavy on my chest. I'm proudly unimpressed. Wrapped in sadness and heavy-limbed, it all looks better when the lights are dimmed. I say screw this and I mean it. To some extent you can't get your time unspent. I'm walking through my fear, I'm walking slow. If you never set a course, you never go. I might be on the right road, roaming in the wrong direction, with a desperate supplication to stand still in silent reflection. I might be on the right road, roaming in the wrong direction, with a desperate supplication to stand still in silent reflection. Tears of laughter and tears of pain, tears of anger and tears of shame. My freedom is my cage, my quietude, my rage, and I'm a cookie cutter sage. I'm walking through my fear, I'm walking slow. I'm walking through my fear, I'm walking slow. I'm walking through my fear, I'm walking slow. If you never set a course, you never go.